Welcome to Social Curiosity Podcast. I am your host, D'Angelo Verse, where we explore the depths of human behavior, personal stories, and relationships to uncover the fascinating layers of who we are. Welcome to the podcast. This particular introduction is going to be different and probably the most challenging introduction that I've had to give through my podcast, and hopefully will have to give through this podcast. And that is because it features a good friend of mine, Hank Thurmond. And Hank was the very first interview that I featured on this podcast. And because it was the very first one, I wasn't happy with my performance and he wasn't happy with his performance. And we decided that we were going to hold off and we were going to re-record. But I'm sad to announce that shortly after recording that podcast episode, Hank passed away from cancer. And it happened so quick, so fast. When he texted me and when he told me that he had cancer, Hank was gone less than a month and a half later. And so I want to release this podcast to honor Hank. Now let me tell you about Hank. Hank was my number one supporter. Whenever my team and I released a video or anything on social media, Hank was the first one to like it and the first one to share it. He used to tell me all the time, D'Angelo, I just want to see you blow up, man. I just want to see you blow up. He supported me. And I could not support Hank the way that he supported me because he was too good at it. And so I want to release this podcast episode to honor my dear friend Hank. And I hope you enjoy it. God bless. Welcome to Social Curiosity Podcast, where we embrace the power of curiosity in our social world. Today I have Rex, Hank Thurmond. I'm going to call you Hank, brother. Welcome to Social Curiosity. How you doing, man?
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah. We've got so much in common. The first thing that we have in common is that, man, we share the same birthdays. You know what I mean?
That's right.
And, yeah. So that's special. February the 6th. The second thing we have in common is that we both went to the same university during the same time and actually graduated the same year.
Yep.
And then I think the last thing, until we uncover some of this journey a little bit more, is that we were both psychologists, just on separate ends, right? Like I went through the social and personality track, and you more applied and clinical in your approach, man. And so I'm super excited to have you on Social Curiosity. And I really appreciate you giving me your time. Not only that, you wrote a book, The Boundary Blueprint. Excited about that as well. You and I've had some conversations. And one of the things that struck me about your story, which is very similar to mine, just unique in its own way, though. Part of my journey is making it out of an impoverished environment, asking the question, why me? How did I do it? Why are people still stuck? How did I advance? Those questions inspired my work and inspired me to come up with a psychological personality concept called Nimble that I think fits right next to the nature-nurture framework inspired by humanistic existential psychologists. But what I've seen is that traditionally people who go into psychology, they have good reasons, especially people who are out here doing the work. So from conversations that you and I've had, you've had a tough upbringing, right? And I want you to just kind of walk us down memory lane with some of that upbringing. And I think that what we'll see is that inspired you to do the work that you're doing.
Yeah, big time. I grew up north of Memphis in a little town, Dyersburg, Tennessee, small town, 18,000. I don't know what it is now, but I was actually born into a pretty wealthy family. And a lot of people look at that as if it's a blessing, but in my opinion, it's a curse because it limits you as far as life's purpose and kind of a direction, because you get sucked into that. Things are easy and it hamstrings you in a whole lot of ways. Now, my father and my mother divorced when I was 4 years old. I didn't see him too much. My mother was young and she was 17 when she had me. And I spent most of my childhood and adolescence really with my grandparents for the most part. But they had their own problems in their own way as well. My father's side, alcoholism straight down. Me, my brother, and my uncle, and my kids are the only ones alive on that side. My grandmother on my mother's side suffered a lot. She had a really bad childhood as well. My grandfather was just, he was cold. I don't know if it was World War II or what, but he was cold. He was distant. I would say narcissistic. He and my grandmother had two daughters who never had to worry about anything per se, as far as any kind of money or anything like that. And the problem that comes with that is that control goes down from generation to generation, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And control, and it's just really toxic. And I never really worked well with it. It's not something I was ready to deal with. But anyway, they had a family business. I worked in that business for 27 years. It was a beer distributorship. And after my grandmother died, things got really toxic. I left. I moved to Nashville with my retirement. I had divorced at the time. Moved here, was recruited by Farmers Insurance. Worst mistake I ever made in my life. I lost everything I had, was homeless for 5 years, working in travel and sales. And then I had become a really bad alcoholic myself. And I had one of those moments, and I think it was in 2016. I had one of those moments. I was like old Red in the Shawshank Redemption. It was time to
Yeah.
start, get busy living or get busy dying, one of the two. And of course, I had a grandkid at the time and wasn't ready to start dying yet. So I
Right.
quit drinking, just cold turkey quit, and tried to start cleaning my life up a little bit. I went through several jobs. I had already gotten my undergrad, and I was old enough. It was really hard to find a job to make the money I needed to get my head back above water. And my best friend, he let me stay at his lake house a good bit of the time. Other than that, I'd have probably been in the street. But in 2018, I had one of those moments with God. I'm like, God, I'm suffering here. I'm seeing all these jobs where I can make money, make the money that I need driving, but I'm type 2 diabetic. I can't get a medical card. Is there not another answer? And so I get on Facebook the next morning, and my friend Bo Estries down in Mississippi, he's posted this message, non-CDL driving job, living in a Sprinter van over the road. Wound up, I took that job. I have called him. He called the guy that he worked for that owned the fleet. I got in my vehicle and drove up to Marblehead, Ohio. It was in December, right on Lake Erie. And I got in that Sprinter van. I lived in it for a year. That's when I got re-enrolled in school. Earned half my master's in that van, in the back of it.
Wow. Wow.
And moved. Then, I
Wait
had,
1 second. 1 second. 1 second. You said you earned half of your master's in the back of a van.
I did, yeah, with a cell phone
Oh man, that's some serious.
truck stop internet.
That's some serious psychological resilience there.
Oh, it wasn't always easy. But anyway, I had my student loan. I was able to make enough money. I didn't make much money that year, but I had more fun. I had more fun than should be allowed. I got to see every goat trail in this country, man, just about it. And I got to study when I was not driving. And I made the best of my time. But I got a CDL, got a commercial driver's license. I got back healthy somewhat. Went to work for a good friend of mine over in West Tennessee. He gave me a chance. Was the only person I did. And then in 2020, I went to work for a timeshare cancellation company here in Franklin. And then the rest is history. But I finished my degree. I started my own podcast,
Yeah,
books and stuff.
that's right.
Viking mindset.
The Viking mindset.
When you grow up without a father and you don't have direction, you're like a boat in the water without a rudder on the back of it. You don't really know where you're going. You grow up in a dysfunctional family like that where you're not allowed to have boundaries. You don't really know who you are.
Mm.
And I had one reason that I was an alcoholic was that I had so much self-hatred that I couldn't I just had trouble dealing with it. My last name comes from Old Norse. And my son, I'm blessed with the two most awesome kids in the world, but my son got me watching the series Vikings back in 2012.
Yeah.
And that was part of my ancestry. And I finally had something I could like about myself. And I had something to
Uh,
build on. So that's where that came from.
Good stuff, man. Now, you and I have had some conversations about the sociological concept of mobbing. You've experienced mobbing within your own family dynamics. Can you talk about that a little bit, man? And even unpack
Absolutely.
what is
Yeah.
mobbing? What is mobbing?
Mobbing is basically is scapegoating on steroids. If you understand narcissistic family systems, typically you have a parent that's highly narcissistic, and a lot of times you have another parent that's codependent, that kind of empowers the toxic stuff. But when you have a narcissistic family dynamics, with children, you typically have a golden child, which would have been my brother, who can do nothing wrong. And then you have a scapegoat child who can do nothing right. And all the family dysfunction gets dumped onto the scapegoat child, which was what happened to me.
Okay.
And as I got older, when you start figuring this stuff out, you've got a couple of things. You spend a little bit of time in denial. And when you can't protect yourself with denial anymore, you got to face it. And when you start to face it, and if you try to fix the dynamics, they'll try to destroy you in most cases, which is what happened to me. Now, mobbing, what that is basically, it's group bullying. It's really intense. And then the victim is driven out. There's a lot more. Some countries like Germany and France have enacted laws that treat it as authentic violence, because that's what it is. It's really intense. It has a really high completed suicide rate for victims. That's how bad it
Mm.
is. Heinz Lehmann, he was, I think, a social psychologist over in Sweden.
Yeah.
Have you heard of him?
Yes,
He was the
absolutely.
one who came up with the term. He had noticed, he was doing research, and he had noticed in nursing populations that there was a really high rate of suicide over in Sweden. And he
Mm.
started studying it. And he was the one that kind of conceptualized it. The whole theoretical framework is modeled after animal behavior.
Tease that out a little bit, being modeled after animal behavior, just herding together.
Well, a whole group ganging up on one,
Okay.
typically a cluster B personality. They turn a whole group against one person in order to drive them out of the group.
We're going to get to some cluster B personality disorders and let you unpack that a little bit. And honestly, that's where I was going to go in terms of trying to understand the causes or what would cause someone to have this maladaptive personality. I think we'll get to that in just a second. So, how did this kind of impact you in terms of understanding that it wasn't just your own personal struggles, right? But it was part of a larger psychological or sociological pattern to the degree that it became something that you concentrated on in graduate studies.
I came across a book, People of the Lie, The Hope for Healing Human Evil. And that was how I got introduced to Eric Fromm. We were talking about him a little bit earlier. But that book really opened my eyes. It took off any rose-colored glasses that I had on as far as my family was concerned, because I realized at that point it was a really toxic dynamic, and it had gone back, I didn't know how many generations, because until somebody stops it, after what I had been through, that became my life's mission, was to stop it in my family.
Yeah.
Most of what I do revolves around bringing awareness to this kind of stuff, because it is very toxic.
I'm not sure in terms of therapy if there is enough consideration on how these cluster B personality disorders impact the family, not just the person himself or herself who struggles with that. So in your case, you were greatly impacted by the idea of mobbing. Seems like that this particular behavior is maybe even due to some of these cluster B personality disorders like narcissism, borderline, histrionic, and antisocial personality disorders. Can you help unpack that a little bit? Even talk about how it's often linked to dysfunctional family dynamics?
Yeah, mobbing is just a really severe form of scapegoating. It goes back to the book of Leviticus, where everybody puts their sins on the goat and drives the goat out. That's what it
Mm,
is, basically, just in
uh,
human behavior. A lot of times, families cannot, and I think a lot of it's unconscious, to be honest with you, D'Angelo. I think a lot of it is unconscious, and it's people that do this, it typically happened to them. Now, cluster B personality in general, and I don't want to get too far off topic, but I think most of the time is a crisis in development and attachment, is what I think. Someone who doesn't have a healthy attachment, it goes to basically disorganized attachment, probably where a child has a caregiver who is loving one minute and hateful the next, and the child doesn't
okay.
know what to think.
Just unhealthy attachment styles, things like that. Maybe we talked about nature and nurture. So some of these environmental nurture components that have led to these maladaptive behaviors and those kinds of things. Yeah, I can definitely see that. Those that have grown up or instill or are still in environments with these cluster B personality disorders, right? What are some common psychological effects that they may experience in adulthood, right? You're an adult now. Obviously, we as much as we think we can forget the past, some things are just sticky, right?
Oh, I
And then
guarantee you.
what do you think that even looks like in terms of adulthood?
People that grow up in situations like I grew up in typically grow up with diffused boundaries or no boundaries at all, or
Okay.
enmeshed boundaries where, your boundary this is my own personal opinion. This is Hank's opinion. I don't believe that anyone can have a good baseline of mental health without having healthy boundaries. I just don't. Your boundary is that's your identity. It's what you say yes to. It's what you say no to. It's the preferences in your life. So if you grow up where you're not allowed to have preferences, you have to go along, you have to go with the flow rather than being independent. I think that starts everything. That starts all the other stuff. Everything starts with that, in my opinion. The relationship problems, the controlling behaviors, people own toxic behavior, it all comes from that, is my opinion. A lot of times, complex trauma, which I had, I would have flashbacks. I would walk into a certain room and something would trigger me and it'd be like my chest turned to stone and I'd
Mm,
just be in just severe panic, just out of nowhere. And, you have PTSD. You have to deal with that, relationship issues, boundaries, people that can't say no, a lack of assertiveness, this type thing that causes struggle in pretty much every area of your life. And the other thing, D'Angelo, is, and we've touched on this in other conversations we've had as well, is that without a boundary, you don't have any direction in your life. You don't have passion about something because you don't know who you
yeah.
are.
Yeah, yeah. You spend a lot of time working on your book, The Boundary Blueprint, a roadmap for mental health and identity. And give me some examples of some of these boundaries that you've set in your own life to maybe combat some of that past trauma, right? So that it's not reoccurring. Is there anything that you can point to?
Yeah, yeah. I grew up I was conditioned to be a doormat in my family. I couldn't say no. And finally, I just bowed my back and I said, no, I'm not doing this anymore. And I can remember I was in the beer business. I've told this story on another podcast, but I was to the point I knew I had to deal with this. I'd done enough soul searching and I'd done enough reading at this point to get to the root of what was going on with the problems I was having. And it was that I couldn't say no. I had really hard time saying no. I was down in Ripley, Tennessee, and there was a guy that owned a store there. And he had asked me for my cell number. I can remember how hard it was. I was crippled before I could say it. I said, no, man, I don't give my personal cell phone number out. And he was
Yeah.
like, okay, no problem. And I was like, that was a lot easier than I thought. And so I just built on it from there. And now maybe I say no way too much.
Man, you've had to heal over the years from that psychological trauma, mobbing, and all of that. How did that come about? Are you still healing from it? Did
Oh
you?
yeah, I think you ever completely heal. I think if you don't continue to heal, you regress. I think that just goes along with just psychological growth in general. If you're not continuing to read, if you're not continuing to learn, if you're not continuing to expand your horizons, then you're going to regress. I read a book, Wayne Dyer, Pulling Your Own Strings. That was another book that really changed my life. But he made a comment in that book that if you were to go to a mental institution and everybody that was an inpatient there, and you ask them what was the one thing that they couldn't deal with in their life, that 95% at least would tell you family. And that while family is the most important institution in our culture, it's also the most destructive.
I can see that. There's this paradox there, especially when I think about my upbringing as well, growing up in a broken home. And now, as a father, trying to make sure that my kids don't have to struggle with some of the things that I've had to struggle with. I'm intense with my love, but I'm also intense with my motivation. I'm intense with my inspiration. I'm intense with everything, right? But leading my entire family via influence is something that I really pride myself on, just because I didn't see a lot of that growing up. They're getting the positive side. Whereas when I grew up in the environment that we grew up in wasn't so positive. And so it just goes with what you just said. Now, for people who are trapped, right? For listeners who are trapped in these toxic family dynamics, struggling with the after effects of these things, what are some steps that you think they could take to reclaim their personal agency and begin healing?
The first thing is you got to come to terms with it. And that's probably one of the hardest things anyone can have to do. You have to come to terms with the fact that you're probably not going to be able to fix it, as hard as that is. Now, the bright side of that is while people think it's just like me, until I read the book People of the Lie, I thought it maybe was just my family, but I did realize that I was not alone. People need to realize that they're not alone and that there are resources out there to help you. There are a lot of books out there you can read. There is therapy. There are a lot of modes of therapy that can help resolve this stuff. And the other thing is, at the end of the day, it really is, if you can learn to see it as a gift, because because you can heal from it, you can end that dynamic and you can make the world a little bit better. You can use it. You can use your wounds to mine for psychological gold and use it. I think we all have this innate drive to make the world a little bit better. I know I do, and I know you do. It's why you're doing what you do. And I think at the end of the day, there is there's a silver lining, because when you're in an environment like that, you don't really know who you are. You get to learn who you really are, and you learn what self-love is. As hard as it is, it's a positive experience at the end of the day. Looking back now, there are some things I would change. One of the things being something you referenced a minute ago. I was making some of the mistakes that my own parents made. And I was to the point where I got to a point where, my kids are going to hate me if I don't stop this. I can't do this anymore. It gives you a way to fix stuff, where they can be fixed, and use your experience to make the world a little bit better. And I think that's fulfilling.
Yeah, Hank. So what I hear is just kind of reframing those past experiences, right?
Exactly.
Psychologically reframing them, looking for the silver lining. I do this thing called a narrative audit, where I ask people, and I've written about it in my book, to audit their narratives that they've had over the years, and even the stories that they may be telling themselves today. And I give them ways to audit that, and then to create the narrative that they would like. And yeah, I think that's powerful, man. Just being able to reframe those past experiences can help people not continue to be stuck. So no, I think that's super dope. What does personal and social flourishing mean to you, Hank? And then my next question is how can people who face similar challenges begin to build meaningful, fulfilling lives?
As I've gotten older, I've learned to look at success differently. I look at success more as being a positive influence more than making a lot of money. As far as social flourishing, I think there's a crisis in the family. I think social flourishing to me would be if we could somehow fix that. Because I think if we could fix the family, everything else would fix itself. It's just my thought.
In terms of social flourishing, there's some collective responsibility within the family that needs to be adjusted and fixed, and especially for families that are broken, right? Such as the one that you grew up in and the one that I grew up in. Society is made up of people, right? And oftentimes we want a better society. We need better people. So we got to start with impacting and inspiring people individually, and then collectively. I think that could lead to social flourishing, man. So in terms of helping people who face similar challenges begin to build meaningful and fulfilling lives, what ways have you done it? And then let's see if we can help some other people do it.
Well, what I did is I read a lot of books to start with when I started learning this stuff. I knew growing up that I had a lot of problems that I needed to figure out how to deal with. So I
Yeah.
read a lot of self-help stuff, Tony Robbins, other stuff. Then I got into more of the psychological stuff after I read People of the Light. I came across another book called The Myth of Sanity by a lady named Martha Stout. And that was the book that really drove me to want to be a psychologist. That was the book that
Mm.
did it. But I think, trauma, there are a lot of good modes of trauma therapy these days. I think if we could just fix this, John Briere, traumatologist, out at works, he's instructor at UC Berkeley. He made the comment, if we could somehow end child abuse and neglect, we could shrink the size of the DSM from over 800 pages to the size of a pamphlet in 2 generations. I think we have to bring awareness to child abuse and deprivation. And I would recommend find a good therapist, find a good family systems therapist, internal family systems where we have different parts and they communicate with each other. Some are unconscious about structural dissociation coming from trauma. That goes along with growing up in a dysfunctional environment like that. Therapy's good. Groups, forums online. You just have to be careful because a lot of times there are wolves in there. I think there are a lot of people in there that'll love you too.
Yeah. Yeah.
You just got
Gotcha.
to take that first step.
Folks can get your book on Amazon. If people want to learn more about you, where can people learn more about you at, Hank?
They can find me, listen to my podcast, Viking Mindset Podcast, or my books are available on Amazon. I've got an e-learning channel that I did on TikTok. I'm happy about that. It's growing. I'm hoping I can
Yeah.
make something out of that. That's been a slow go though.
Yeah. I got you. All right. So this is going to conclude my time with Hank, man. But you know what? I think we're going to do this again. I really, truly appreciate you, brother. And to all you guys that are listening, that are watching, I want you to stay curious. Until next time, peace.